Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to kick it off. So I'm Sam and I'm actually an engineer at Instagram. And Jenny and I are the co-hosts of a podcast called Tech Setters, and we are so excited to be here with you today to speak with some amazing panelists. A bit about me is I'm from Maryland. I went to Columbia for undergrad and I studied computer science, and I'm now a software engineer at Instagram.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenny. I'm Sam's co-host for Tech Setters. A bit about me is that I'm originally from North Carolina. I studied CS at Harvard, and I'm currently the co-founder of an early stage startup called Re-Inc. and also a startup investor. So thank you all so much for tuning in today. And more importantly, we are thrilled to be joined by 4 amazing panelists who we cannot believe that we were able to get them to be a part of this. And I'll just introduce them all briefly and then we'll kick it off. So perhaps when I say each of your names, if you could just wave. So first we have Brandy Freeman, who is originally from Alabama, and she studied metallurgical engineering with a minor in computer and applied technology at the University of Alabama. She was a part of TFA and is a full-time CS instructor at the University of Alabama and is also a Code with Classie instructor during the summer. So thank you for joining us, Brandy.
Excited to be here.
Next, we have Amir Brown, who is a software quality engineer at Adobe. He graduated from Florida's A&M University and currently works on the Adobe Spark team as a software quality engineer, and was also previously trained as a full stack web developer as part of the Adobe Digital Academy. So thanks, Amir. And then next we have Tia, who is a senior director of IT automation at Cognizant Technologies, where she helps global clients pursue best practice technology assessments. And she's an IT executive with over 25 years of successful results-oriented management. And she previously studied management information systems at Northeastern University. So thanks for joining us, Tia. And lastly, and not least, we have Noah, who is actually a designer and has a very interesting path into technology. Her bachelor's degree is in ceramics and glass design, and she's currently a UX designer at Amazon, where she reimagines the experience of online shopping for Amazon devices. So thank you, Noah, and thank you all of you for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's Computer Science Education Week this week, and the reason that we started Tech Setters is we wanted to highlight people who are innovators in the industry, that are trailblazers, and have had non-traditional paths into the tech industry. And we're so excited to learn from you today. So I'd love to ask you a question about your current role with a slight twist. So I'd love to hear what you thought you would do or what you wanted to do when you were growing up as a child. And then I'd love to hear each of you talk a little bit about what your role is today and how you as a child might have imagined yourself in that way. So we can start with Tia, if you would like.
Sure, thank you. I'm very excited to be here. So when I was 5, I wanted to be a doctor. And which is ironic because I'm afraid of blood. So I wasn't sure how that was going to work out, honestly. So I had to pivot. And I pivoted because I always would take apart things in the house, radios, TVs, and my parents weren't very happy about that, but I always put them together. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't, right? So that was my pivot. So the other question you had was, what would my 5-year-old self think of me, what I do today? And my 5-year-old self would think I was pretty boring, right? Because I sit in front of a computer all day, and I'm on the phone and on WebExes all day talking to customers. So I think, I enjoy what I do. I love helping customers. I love helping people. But my 5-year-old self probably would think I'm pretty boring.
Yeah, I think sometimes the alignment between what you envision yourself as a child and what you're doing day to day can have different types of satisfaction that aren't always obvious. So I'd love to hear from you next, Brandy.
Yeah, sure. This is a fun question for me because when I think about being 5 years old, I grew up in a family of 2 older sisters and we're all stair steppers. So we're like a year and a half apart. And I very vividly remember being 5 and like sitting my older sisters down and lining up our stuffed animals and dolls and action figures and whoever else would listen to me. And I was the teacher. And so even though I took like a traditional STEM path, I majored in engineering. It's crazy to think that like at 5, I knew I wanted to be an educator, even though I took the engineering technology route. And then what I do today, I'm a full-time computer science instructor, and I got that to that point through Teach for America, where like I went to my advisor when I was graduating from college and was like, yeah, I know I'm about to graduate with this engineering degree, but I want to be a teacher. And so then I joined Teach for America and became a high school chemistry teacher. And then that led me to being a CS instructor now. And so I think my 5-year-old self would like high five me and be like, good for you for like living in what you wanted to do. My family is a pretty STEM oriented family. Like my mom was a CS professor. My dad was a math professor. My sister is a senior software engineer. So like there is that like impact of like following the family tradition. And like while my parents and family were super supportive when I made the transition to education, there can be that like familial guilt that happens that I experienced a little bit of, but I couldn't imagine doing anything other than being an educator, and specifically a tech educator. So I think like little Brandy would be like, you go girl, live in your truth and you educate.
Yeah, first of all, that's phenomenal and so inspiring that you have actually manifested your 5-year-old dream. And also that's so amazing that you have such a strong STEM and education background in your family. I feel like that's really incredible. Amir, I would love to hear from you next.
For sure. When I was 5 years old, my family, if they were listening, they would vouch for this. I used to lay down in the grass all the time and just look up in the sky and like ask questions like, what is this? Where am I? Like, what are those, right? I was one of those really inquisitive kids. I think I wanted to be an astronaut because space was like the most intriguing thing to me. And obviously like I kind of have like a dual personality when it comes down to like my interests. Like I'm very interested in technical things, scientific things, but also like very social, into music and into like, socializing, throwing parties and events and things like that. So I never really knew what I wanted to do, but technology was always something that was like in the back of my mind. It's just like, man, it's so cool. Like computers. One of my first science projects my mom helped me with, we got an old motherboard and just kind of took toothpicks and like glued them down and made little flags of labeling the different parts of the motherboard and things like that. So like this like inquisition into technology was always been there. I didn't go a traditional route in college. I went to a school at Florida A&M University for public relations and actually graduated in 2014 and went out and got jobs in marketing at marketing agencies and was going down that route. And, it just kind of like hit me one day in 2016. I got the bug again. I was like, man, I really love technology. I love designing products and thinking of ideas and like figuring out what can be done and what the possibilities are. So that's when I decided to go to General Assembly and learn how to code. Luckily, the Adobe Digital Academy was opening that year, and I got accepted into it. Got trained in full stack web development, and I didn't go on to be a software developer at Adobe, but a software quality engineer is actually a really good space for me because it allows me to sit in between the engineers, the product managers, and like honestly, the key stakeholders. And I'm the last line of defense where code is going out to the users and making sure that their user experience is good. I have to understand every part of the stack. And it really just satisfies me and my inquisitive brain. So I think my 5-year-old self would be pretty proud of where we've come and excited about where we're going.
That's amazing. I love your example of the first science project because I have to be honest, I studied computer science and I wish I knew every part, how to label the parts of a motherboard, but I do not, and I would love to learn. So that's pretty amazing. So Noah, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I loved art and I wanted to make things. I thought I could make anything, but naturally people often doubted that. But I thought they were wrong. I grew up in the dorms of UCLA with my parents who were immigrants from Israel. And at times I was made fun of because of my name. Kids used to call me Noah's Ark, and they said, "You don't look like a boy." But they were making fun of me. And me as a 5-year-old, I knew that they just didn't get it because I wasn't named after that Noah. I was named after the other Noah, who is also in the Bible, but she's a girl. And she's even considered the first feminist, probably in history. So Noah was one of 5 daughters. And at the time, girls couldn't inherit their father's land. So Noah went to Moses and advocated through God to change that rule. So I knew growing up that I could do anything because I was that Noah. Today, I'm a designer. And I found this passion through a very unique path, through literally opening a door handle. So it was in my first year in college when I got an assignment to design a door handle. So I wanted you to imagine a door handle, like picture that thing in your head that you use every day to open a door. Now you think that it's something simple, right? It's just a doorknob. But when I had to stop and think about it, I realized that there's actually a whole lot of assumptions and decisions that go into designing that door handle that you're picturing in your head right now. For example, haven't you had a time when you came back in and your hands were full of groceries, or your hands were dirty and slippery? And those of you here that are left-handed, you probably know that most door handles are built with right-handed people in mind. So what I ended up doing is designing a door handle that would be effective for both right-handed and left-handed people. But in that process, I realized the difference between art and design, and that the way something is designed can change how people behave. And that's when I knew that I wanted to be a designer. So I think 5-year-old me would be amazed. But all I wanted to do was create art. And now I've turned that art into design, into something functional that touches millions of people. I mean, if you think about it, the street you live on, the chair you're sitting on, the screen you're looking at right now, were all designed by someone. The colors were chosen by someone. The user interface was negotiated endlessly. Where that button is or isn't was all someone's decision. I definitely didn't think about all that when I was 5. And I can tell you that between 5-year-old me and now me, there were a lot of doubts, and many times that I thought that I couldn't do it, especially going into tech. I believed the lie that it's too technical and it's not for me. And I also believe that it's too hard to get in and too male dominated and not up my alley at all. And that may be true for you too. But I continued to make things just like the door handle. And that eventually was what brought me into tech. So I want to tell you that whatever you want to be and whatever your gift is, there's an incredible opportunity for you here.
Noah, that is such an inspiring story and very uplifting and encouraging. And I feel like you could tell your 5-year-old self to tell the haters that now there are a lot of tech companies named Noah. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that with us. So I think it's so interesting that each of you have such unique backgrounds, and you all show that you don't necessarily need to major in computer science in college to be a computer scientist. So our next question is, when did you first consider pursuing a path in tech? And Amir, I'd love for you to kick it off.
Sure. It's a pretty cool story, actually. I think this was around maybe 2010. The Social Network, the movie about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook came out. And I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I probably watched that movie like 10, 12, 15 times, I'm not even sure. But I remember the first time I saw it and I was just like enamored. I literally was just like, oh my God, like these kids just sat in their dorm room, created this tech application, and just like it expanded and blew up their lives and just like took them to places they could have never imagined they would go. And it was like literally driven by their own idea, their own like desire to see this thing be created, and like people adapted to it and they built community around it. And like, you know, it just made me super inspired that exact moment. I actually brought out my notebook as soon as the movie was over. I mean, my parents can vouch for this. As soon as the movie was over, and started to design what I considered would be a Facebook equivalent for high school students called School Days. And like the timeline was like the cafeteria, and then like your profile was your locker, and like, you know, just like all these different extrapolations from Facebook into like what a local high school would look like and how different high schoolers can talk to each other, et cetera. And like, obviously it was like nothing that I pursued, but it was the first time I was like, holy cow, my brain is like wired for this. Like, this is exactly what I want to do. And then from there, I actually didn't take any steps towards it. I kept majoring in public relations, and I went off and worked in marketing, which I think was super helpful for me as an overall person. It made me get out of my comfort zone in many ways. But, you know, that was the first time I was like, I'm super interested in technology. And it wasn't until I was in San Francisco in 2016, I was working a sales job at the time. And I just was feeling very, very unfulfilled, like, and almost to the point of like depression, where I was just like, what is my point? Like life, like, why am I here? Like, I know I'm not supposed to be doing what I'm doing. And, you know, I called my manager. I told him I was going to be taking a week, and that would be my last week. And I quit. And, you know, I just really didn't know what I was going to do for a month. And I thought about it. I was like, am I going to be, you know, an art director? Am I going to be a marketer? Am I going to be an engineer? And ultimately I decided on, I'm going to try the hardest thing that I've been avoiding my entire life. And I'm going to try to become a technologist. And the first thing I want to do is learn how to code. I'm going to go as deep into it as I can. And, you know, that was one of the most challenging things I ever did. There was a lot of doubt. There was a lot of hiccups. I learned my learning style, which is actually hands-on, over the shoulder, showing me exactly how it's done. And then I could remember it really easily if I see it that way, rather than watching videos or reading and things like that. So, you know, like it took me out of my comfort zone and really showed me that I can do this. You know, fast forward, I got the internship at Adobe, and then they hired me full time, and I've been there ever since. And, you know, I'm just super happy that I took that leap.
Wow. So it started with a movie, and then it ended with challenging yourself and taking that leap of faith and completely switching roles. It's incredible
Absolutely.
to hear. So thank you for sharing. Tia, what about you?
So I won't say my age, but I didn't grow up, you know, around computers, so to speak. They weren't really in. When I graduated from college, I think that's when the first car phone came out. Remember, it was like this big bag that you should put over your shoulder, which is very different than cell phones today. But so when I think about my path in technology, I really believe that it was guided by God, right? Like, I didn't have, like, I like to take things apart, like I had mentioned before. I went to a trade high school, which is, you know, was out of the norm. Now we have more charter schools and the like. But when I grew up, there was like public school, and then they started doing these trade schools where it was like mechanics and culinary arts and hairdressing. And so I didn't really want to go to a regular high school, so I chose a trade high school, thinking I could learn about business, I could learn about how to take things apart and put things back together. Let's just try this out, right? So I did business, and my guidance counselor said, you're not made for college. You should probably just go be a secretary somewhere. That's what girls do, right? So my defiant self said, yeah, nah, I think I'm good. And I grew up in Boston, so I applied to Northeastern University. And what intrigued me about that is they have an internship program, right? So you do this thing called a co-op, where you go to school for 6 months and then you go to work for 6 months. So I said, that's kind of like what I'm doing now. Why don't we just try this out, right? And I got accepted. And then I was able to get an internship at a bank doing support, where I would have to climb under the desks and reconnect cables, and I had to wear a skirt, which was crazy. And I had to, you know, work on desktops and work on servers. So that's kind of the path that took me down. I was like, well, I kind of like this. This is interesting. And I changed my major to computer information systems. I tried coding when I was in grad school. I did not do very well, like even with C++, right? So I was like, okay, that's not the path for me. I understand the technology. I understand the business side of it. So how can I pair my love with helping, right? My mom was a therapist, and, you know, as a child, we had to go bake breads and hand those into elderly homes. So giving back is always a thread of what I do, right? Like, and everything that I do, it's like, how can I help someone else see their own potential, or just make them smile? So it's kind of a convoluted story, right? Like, it's like, okay, you hit roadblocks, like I think Amir had mentioned and Noah had mentioned, you'll always have the haters, no matter where you are and what you're trying to do. But I've always known within myself that God has destined me for more than what I saw in front of me, because I didn't, unlike Brandy, I didn't come from an environment that there were technologists everywhere, right? It was more social giving back and artistic. So I didn't really know. And it's really important that if you have a dream that I believe is put inside you and you believe that dream, and you may be your only cheerleader at times, and I say go for it.
That's incredible.
So
It
inspiring.
reminds me of one of our Tech Centers episodes with Brenda Darden-Wilkerson, who's the CEO and president of Anita Borg. And she was like, sometimes the only person who can cheer you on is yourself. And she would write sticky notes with her dreams and like stick them on her bathroom mirror. So it reminds me of that story.
I also am so inspired by that defiance and that focus on, you know, saying, hey, I will find something that is for myself. And even when you weren't sure if it was programming, you were like, okay, I have these passions. Where is their space? So I find that so inspiring. And I would love to, yeah. And I think that a lot of times people think that, you know, going into the tech industry or going into STEM is really this one singular thing where you're sitting. I used to imagine it as what they'd show in, you know, hacker movies where it's like, or even in The Social Network, right? Where it's like you're sitting in a dorm room in the dark with a bunch of, you know, I don't even know what around you. And, you know, that didn't seem that appealing to me, right? I didn't want to be in a dark room. I love talking to people, but I love being able to create. And so I would love to hear from maybe you first, Brandy, some of the ways that you're able to incorporate that creative piece into your role.
Yeah, sure. So I think I guess for me, like my passion is obviously education. And I did, even though I majored in like engineering, I did take a non-traditional pathway to computer science. And so I think we all have to think back to like, what are we passionate about? And so when I think about what am I passionate about, I'm passionate about my dog. I'm passionate about national parks, and I'm passionate about justice and, you know, equity. So even though I see my role right now as being an educator, I think that is important to consider in the computer science like world, because there's got to be someone to teach all of the people who love computer science and technology, whether that's coding or the general courses or whatever that may be. And so my passion for specifically right now is very much in justice and equity. And so I've asked myself over the last couple of years, like, what is it that I can do like in this moment in time in my role? And so for me, that looks like, we know that for women in STEM, the numbers are low. We know particularly for women of color, that is even lower. So I've been working with my department chair and some of my colleagues on diving into our numbers, like who is passing our intro to CS class, because if you don't pass that, then of course you're not going to graduate, and then of course you're not going to, you know, change the field. And so my passion is changing the narrative of if having to be some super in a dark bedroom coding since I was 5 years old to be a force in the tech world. And that starts at, okay, we've dived into the numbers, who's passing, who's not. Now what do we do? Like, what can we put in place? Like, what are things that we're doing as a department that is moving the needle forward, and what are things that are not? And so in addition to like just teaching, my passion and creativity aligns in creating like opportunities to support students that need it most. And then seeing them, I get my satisfaction when I see them graduate, whether they're one of our minors or our majors, or I teach a lot of business kids, a lot of MIS and accounting who also go off to do great things in the tech world. So it does look different for different folks. And so that's where my passion and excitement and creativity comes in.
I love that so much. And it really reminds me of this quote from Marian Wright Edelman of "you can't be what you can't see." And I think that finding those examples and ways to inspire people, and that's really why we started TechSetters, because we were like, there are not enough examples. And we know, like you said, without representation in tech, it's not just an issue for representation's sake, right? It's because we want to build products that actually represent the people using them, right? And we want to make sure that when we're building artificial intelligence machine that recognizes your face, it'll be able to recognize faces of all skin colors. And I think it's so important that you're doing this type of work. And it's so amazing that you're able to channel that in the place where people are first getting exposure to the tech industry or to technology, like using technology for whatever they go on to do. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for what you're doing. And I'd love to hear from you, Noah, just how you get to be creative or incorporate your passions in your role.
Yeah, working for Amazon is one of the most exciting and challenging things I've ever done. I love this job, but there are definitely a lot of hard things that do feel like work. But the things that keep me going and what fuels my passion are two things. One is the helpfulness that I see design brings to our customers. For example, I discovered that people have a hard time choosing between products that are very similar to each other. An example is Echo Dot and Echo Dot with clock, because they almost look identical to each other. So it can be really confusing. Do I get this one with the clock, or do I get the one without the clock? And as I was working on making that experience easier, I took inspiration from journalism. If you open a newspaper and try to decide what article to read, there are several hints that guide you. You have a big title and a subtitle and a little teaser about what the article is about, and all of that before you decide what you want to read. But in e-commerce, that's almost non-existent. You kind of go from search results to reading an article, and that can feel overwhelming. So I created a widget that allows you to see bite-sized summaries of products that look very similar to each other, that explain what they're all about and what are the differences between them, so that it's super easy to decide which one will be better for you. And that has really changed how people purchase these products. So seeing that that I can be helpful in what I do to people, that's really inspiring to me. And the other thing that really makes my job not feel like work is mentorship and being able to teach and learn from others. So in the last few months, I've been engaged in this new exciting program called Amazon Future Engineer, where we connect with middle and high school students and share insights from our own journey in tech. And I can't tell you how much this experience of connecting with students has given me more inspiration to do what I do. And that's also what drove my passion to be on this panel today.
Wow. I will keep what you built in mind next time I'm shopping on Amazon, which is probably today. So to wrap things up, would love to hear from each of you if there is one piece of bite-sized and actionable advice that all of our listeners and viewers can take away, like maybe something that can be summarized in a tweet or an Instagram post, because we would love to share these on social media after. So Tia, will you kick us off?
Sure, thank you. Someone just put something in there. But Tia, I was looking at things. So one thing that I really think about often is something that T.S. Eliot had said. And he said, if you aren't in over your head, how do you know how tall you are? Right? So if you just think about that for a minute, we tend to be in a safe space often, right? And that's interesting. I say that now in the height of the pandemic, right? We thought this was going to be a few weeks. We're months and months in, and everything is just so different now. So the one thing that I would say is always try to stretch yourself, right? I just got Lean Portfolio Certified Management. I just did my Lean Agilist certification in the summer. It's always exciting and invigorating to just continue to learn, right? And always be like, okay, this is something, how do I help my customers move from this to this? Noah talks about how do you design and taking different areas of her life to then infuse that. Amir's like, I'm never satisfied. Let me think about something else I can do, right? So how do you take all of those things and then always stretch yourself? And I say the same thing to my kids. I'm like, I have a 21-year-old and I'm like, if you're not thinking about the next 4 things you want to do, then we need to help you think about the next 4 things you're going to do. And I bought each of them an idea pad. So when you have these wonderful ideas, right, that tend to come in usually in the morning time when you're waking up, write it down, because you always want to have a list of things that you can go back to that can stretch you, that you might have thought about, that you'll forget about by the time you get up and take a shower, but they're really important at that moment. Always take risks. I've been supported by some amazing mentors, and I've been, I'm a mentor to I don't know how many people at work, in my personal life, in the family, and those are very important qualities to have and always think about going forward. And lastly, be your best advocate, be your best motivator, and be your best friend.
I love that you are challenging us to really seek out and do what we are afraid of. Like what would you do if you were not afraid quote, I think really resonated with what you just said there. And also, I think it's so important that you're speaking about normalizing failure, and a hashtag that I've seen recently on social media is hashtag like Failure Friday, and has at least made me feel more empowered to be okay. And like failure is not a bad thing. It's something we should embrace. So Amir, wondering if you can share yours.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna piggyback off some of those sentiments. It's like, I always think about that first flight for a bird, right? Like, how does it know it's not gonna die and just fall, right? It doesn't. It's just like, man, I'm built for this. I'm gonna jump, I'm gonna fly, and it does. So, I think if an opportunity comes your way and that door opens and it scares you a little bit, like, you should absolutely face it and walk through it, because it's gonna be the one thing that makes you know and test yourself and test your confidence, test your skills, and test that like thing in the back of your mind that says like, I can do this. And then when you prove it to yourself, it feels so good. It's like such a satisfying feeling. And it gives you that confidence to then go back and tell other people, like, yeah, go ahead, jump. It's not as bad as it seems. And like when you land on your feet, or when your wings spread and you fly, it just kind of like, it's a very like fulfilling feeling. And I think that everybody should seek that in life. I know what it's like to be sitting at a desk and have managers that don't really care for you, and they're kind of working you as if you were a machine. If they could put a machine in your place, then they would. And like, it's a very terrible feeling. And I would say, like, if anybody finds themselves stuck in that position, or even like, being driven to a place like that, like Noah was saying, like someone was telling her what she should or shouldn't do based upon the characteristics of who she is, I would say, like, find the next thing that scares the crap out of you and just do it. and I promise you, it's going to be, no matter what happens, at the end of it, you're going to learn something. Whether it's, oh, I'm good at this, or whether I'm not good at this, or, my communication style. For me in software engineering, it actually was my learning style. Like, I never paid attention to how I learn and what's the best way for me to learn. So now that I know that, I've learned literally how to code through mastering this learning style of like reaching out to mentors, finding people that will put time in their schedule, sit with me, going over code with people and just reading, like, what does that do? Okay, what does that do? Almost like a little kid, like a 3-year-old. It's like, what is this? What is that? Why is that? Why? And I think that those are the things that have given me the confidence to say, okay, like, I can put my own hands to the keyboard and like get something done. So yeah, I think if it scares you, you should definitely just face it.
Yeah, I think that also, asking those questions and normalizing that need for help, to ask for help, and also giving back once you've made it somewhere and saying, hey, look, this is how I actually did it. I think that that's so much of, what it is to demystify the path of how you got there and help uplift others along with yourself. So thank you for sharing, Amir. I would love to hear from you, Noah.
Yeah, I want to start with where advice is coming from. When I had to decide what I want to learn for college, I had a real dilemma. Should I learn something practical or something that I love doing? And I couldn't make up my mind. So I signed up for 2 different majors at 2 different universities. I signed up for a science degree in one university and for an art degree in another university. And I was kind of hoping that I wouldn't get into one of them and the choice would be made for me. But unfortunately for me, I guess I got into both. And the choice was extremely, extremely hard. Eventually, I decided to go into science because I thought I needed to be practical and that's the way to get a job. So I called the art college and I told them that I'm giving up my space. And right before school started, there was an orientation day where we went to meet our professors and the other students and choose our classes and see our schedule and so on. And I went in that day and I saw my schedule with all the science and math and no art. And it just felt like the biggest mistake of my life. I came back home from that orientation day. I was crying and feeling like I don't belong there. So very hesitantly, I called the art university and asked if they would still take me back in, even though it was just a week before the semester started and the spot was probably already filled. Luckily, they kept my space and I could spend the next 4 years doing art, which I loved every second of. So here's my tip for you. Go learn something you love. Don't choose a career based on what you think the market wants. Industry needs will change for sure in your lifetime. But if you follow your passion and persevere, you'll find your own unique ways to bring value to the world. And that can only be done if you do something you love.
And you're like a living example of that. I feel like because you have this amazing art background and like a technical background, you're at the intersection of these two spaces and you're a practitioner of like interdisciplinary approaches, which is incredible and very inspiring. So to wrap, will you wrap things up for us, Brandy?
Yeah, I'd love to. So loved so much of what everyone said. And I guess in short, for me, one thing is to always apply. I know there's been a lot of talk and good conversation around imposter syndrome, but when I think about like the job I have now, and I very vividly remember applying for it in 2016, being like, oh, I meet most of these. I'm not sure, like, am I too young? Do I not have all of what they're looking for? And I was really close to talking myself out into waiting till a better time when I had, you know, more experience or whatever to apply. And it turns out that I was what they were looking for at the time. And so I've learned over the years that whether it's a scholarship, a job, you know, a new hobby, whatever it is, like apply for it or start it. It's always the right time. The worst that can happen is you get that no and you take that no and you learn from it and you move on and then try again.
I love that. And I think it's so much about taking that first step because worst case scenario, you don't get it that time. And if you try enough, you know, you never know what can happen. But if you don't take your opportunity, you'll never even have the chance. So I love saying that. Thank you all so much for taking the time today to be on this panel. This has been phenomenal. Computer Science Education Week, in my mind, is all about how do we help demystify this field that I wish I had known existed earlier in my life, and how do we also help show the different facets and faces of what technology is, like what it can be. So thank you all so much for joining, and please everyone, please feel free to follow Teach for America on Instagram, and also feel free to hear more stories like the incredible panelists today on TechSetters podcast, and you can follow us on Instagram at TechSetters. And thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, TFA and Code with Classie.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.